Hi, good evening, brothers and sisters. How are you doing this evening? I hope all is well with you. Welcome to our interactive Facebook live show every Sunday from 8 p.m. My name is Joshua Francis, attorney at law and former member of parliament for the Roseau South constituency. Welcome. We're going to have an interactive program here. We're going to talk about the death penalty, or what is often referred to as capital punishment. I hope you had a good day, wonderful day, wherever you are in whichever part of the world. I hope you're having a good one. I hope you're not too cold for those of you in North America, those of you in Europe. I hope that you are keeping warm. And of course, we are living in COVID time. I hope you're taking all the necessary precautions to maintain and protect your good health. For those of us here in Dominica, it was a fairly rainy day, in some parts more than others. Here at my home in Belfast, just a little bit of rain, particularly in the evening. Generally, another day the Lord has made. We rejoice and we are glad in it. Once again, welcome to Contending for Dominica. This is a little Facebook talk show which we'll be having every Sunday from 8 p.m. We'll be focusing on several issues of national importance, whether it's social, economic, political, religious, anything that is of relevance to you. Of course, I invite you to identify topics, identify issues which we could vent on right here on Facebook. I invite you to be interactive. A matter of fact, this evening topic calls for interaction, and I'm inviting you to do so. I take the opportunity to ask you to share this video live, this Facebook live, so that we can get as many persons as possible to participate in our Facebook live show. Once again, welcome to Contending for Dominica. Your host is Joshua Francis, your attorney at law and former MP. Of course, in Dominica, like every other part of the world, once a politician, always a politician. So I'm not too sure whether I should introduce myself as a politician, but you do recognize me as one, and I am what you say I am as far as your perspective is concerned in regards to politics. Good evening, Alison. I hope you had a great day and you are having a good evening. So, as I said, this evening we're going to discuss capital punishments. What is capital punishment? You know, when we talk about capital punishments, what exactly are we talking about? A live issue in Dominica in view of the verdict in the Rodman Lewis case. That is a murder trial which was completed just a few days ago here in the Commonwealth of Dominica. A guilty verdict was returned against Rodman Lewis, who was held guilty for the murder of his girlfriend. Of course, the prosecution asked for hanging or capital punishment. As you know, the matter has been adjourned. The court has taken time. The judge, the learned judge, will assess the matter and will determine what is the sentencing. Will she sentence Rodman to hanging? Will she sentence him to capital punishment? We will see. So that is what we're going to discuss. Of course, many of you are for and some of you are against. Well, let's put it this way. Many of you are for capital punishments and many of you are against capital punishments. It is now 4 minutes after the hour. It is actually 4 minutes past 8 here in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Wherever you are, it may be earlier, it may be later. I just hope that you're having a good one. I hope that you enjoyed your lunch, you enjoyed your dinner if you are a few hours ahead. Some of you are probably in bed, just taking in a few hours of relaxation, and you have joined me. I thank you for being here with me, and I urge you to share the video. Let us get more people to be part of this live. It is an educational show. It is meant to enlighten and to give us an opportunity to share our views in a very civil and respectful way. Last week was the commencement of this Facebook Live. It was successful. Of course, after I did a review, I noticed that some people did post disturbing remarks on the Facebook Live. Let us not take the opportunity to attack anyone. Of course, it does not bother me when you say unclean things about Joshua Francis. It says more about you when you make disparaging remarks. I urge you to be civil, to be respectful, and to share your views. Last week I had some difficulties identifying your comments. I hope this week we do not have such challenges. I'm still learning about this Facebook Live. I was hoping to have taken some time to understand it better so that I can dispense a better show. Unfortunately, due to my busy schedule, I did not, but I assure you and I promise you moving forward, I will do something about it so we can make this more interactive, more successful, and it can play an important role in the further education and enlightenment of our people. So as I said, welcome to Contending for Dominica. This evening we are going to talk about capital punishment. What is capital punishment? Capital punishment has been around for some time. It is not something that crept up just yesterday. Many civilizations use capital punishment for different purposes. Basically, we refer to capital punishment as legal death, justified death, taking somebody's life in retribution for a crime. In the past, several methods of capital punishment were employed. Some of them were very barbaric. People were burnt on stakes. People were left for animals to feed on them. Persons were sent in hot furnaces. Persons were pricked with certain objects. Certain persons were killed with swords and other objects. Over time, as society became more civilized, you find capital punishment execution warranted less barbaric methods. However, in postmodern times, many countries have banned capital punishments. In the Commonwealth of Dominica, that has not happened. We still have capital punishments on our books. In the Legislation Offenses Against the Person Act, Section 2, the law provides for capital punishments. If someone is found guilty for murder, that person can be sentenced to be hung or to be subject to capital punishments. Also, under the Treasons Act of the Commonwealth of Dominica, somebody can be sentenced under the punishment of capital punishments. In many other jurisdictions, not as many as in the 60s and 70s, they continue to practice capital punishment. In certain parts of the United States, certain states, they do practice capital punishment. Some countries like Dominica have capital punishments on their books, but they don't really practice it. The only person and the last person who was sentenced to be hung in Dominica was a gentleman, the head of the Defense Force, sometime in 1986. I think some Newton man, a man who was involved in an attempted coup d'etat against the late Dame Eugenia Charles, the head and prime minister of the Commonwealth of Dominica in 1981. He was brought into trial, he was found guilty, and the learned judge subjected him to capital punishments. He was executed by hanging in 1986. That's the only record we have in Dominica to date. Since then, we have had other people who were sentenced to capital punishments, but that did not happen. In 2004, we had a case of Balsaw versus the state. Balsaw was found guilty for the murder of his ex-girlfriend, late girlfriend, and he was sentenced to be hung. He appealed to the Eastern Caribbean Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal upheld the decision of the High Court in the Commonwealth of Dominica, that is, Mr. Balsaw had to be hung. Mr. Balsaw then appealed to the Privy Council, and the Privy Council held that capital punishment, as we know it, is inconsistent with the Constitution of Dominica, particularly Section 2 and Section 5, which speak to the right to life. So our Constitution says that we have a right to life. We must not be subjected to cruel and unjust and inhumane conditions. And when you have somebody on death row, psychologically the person is being punished, and that is considered to be cruel, especially when somebody stays on death row for a significant period of time, as happened in Pat and Morgan, a case which emanates from the jurisdiction of Jamaica. Of course, in the Balsaw case, the Privy Council relied on several other cases which stemmed or emanated from other jurisdictions in the Caribbean, including a very famous case, Spencer and the Queen, as well as You and the Queen, a case from St. Lucia, where persons who were found guilty for murder were sentenced to death, and the Privy Council held that such a punishment is in fact inconsistent with the constitutions of the respective Commonwealth Caribbean countries. In You and the State, the case from St. Lucia, basically Privy Council says, well, you can sentence someone to death, but it has to be aggravated murder. And the determination of whether a case is considered to be one of a brutal murder, that is for the learned judge, the trial judge, to determine. As I said, our topic here this evening is capital punishment. I'm still looking for your comments so that we can have an interactive show. I suspect I will have to use my phone to look for your comments, because for some reason I cannot identify your comments here on my laptop. But let me once again invite you. We are going to have a very interactive show here. I want to know whether you are in support of capital punishment. Do you think that it is just for a High Court judge to subject someone to murder? You know, of course, some of you all are very religious and you do not subscribe to eye for eye and tooth for tooth, and therefore you are against capital punishment because in your view it is a form of murder. It is not just that somebody or any state should take responsibility to take the life of another person. And of course, those of you who are in support of capital punishment would spin that issue on its head by saying that someone who has taken the life of another has forfeited his own life, and as such, he should be subject to murder. That is just one of the arguments for and another against as far as capital punishment is concerned. But let us understand, why is it that some countries have capital punishment and others don't? Why is it that some of us think that we should justify a state taking the life of another when someone is found guilty for murder or for treason? Well, as I said, there are many countries that have banned capital punishment. Of course, our laws are consistent with laws coming from Great Britain. And in 1965, the UK got rid of capital punishment for murder and for all other crimes in 1969. Many other areas have banned capital punishment. As you know, Amnesty International, which is an arm of the United Nations, have been championing the movement against capital punishment. We refer to those who are fighting for the ban of capital punishment as abolitionist. I'm sure we have a few here in Dominica, and this is a live issue, particularly after the Rodman Lewis case, where this gentleman was found guilty for murdering his girlfriend. The prosecution, namely Shuma Dairampu representing the state, asked the court to sentence Mr. Lewis to hanging. Will the judge do that? We will see. Now, if the judge were to do that, of course, Mr. Lewis can appeal, and I would expect him to appeal if such a sentence were to be given, because we do have cases even from the jurisdiction of Dominica. As I said, in the Balsa case, the Privy Council held that hanging was unjust, it was inconsistent with the Constitution of Dominica, and as such, if the Justice Winant were to give a judgment of sentence for capital punishment for Lewis, we would expect an appeal. All right? But how do we get there? Why is it that capital punishment is an issue as far as the criminal justice system is concerned? We need to understand that when somebody is found guilty, that person has to be sentenced. And in every criminal jurisdiction throughout the world, there are objectives of sentencing, the principles of sentencing. Why is it that persons are sentenced? Well, number one, persons are sentenced because of retribution. In other words, you get punished for your crime. So in the case of capital punishment, some people argue you take somebody's life, then your life should be taken. That's one. Number two, deterrence. Another objective or principle of sentencing is deterrence. You commit an offense, you have to be punished. By being punished, a message is sent to potential criminals that should they commit such an offense, a similar offense, then that is the punishment they would get, and as such, they will be discouraged. That is another principle of punishment or sentencing. Another objective of sentencing is rehabilitation. Well, when a court finds someone guilty, the court takes into consideration whether you can be rehabilitated. In the case of death or in the case of capital punishment, there is no such possibility, because when somebody is hung or somebody is executed, that person does not get the opportunity to be rehabilitated. Although, from a moral point of view, as Thomas Aquinas, the philosopher, has stated, when you are sentenced to capital punishment, you get an opportunity to repent, and as such, you give yourself a chance to live in the next life. Well, from a practical point of view, that is not necessarily a strong point in favor of capital punishment. So I just told you what are some of the objectives of sentencing. We said deterrence, we said retribution, we said rehabilitation. We also have what is referred to as reparations. Well, what is reparations? It's similar to retribution. You get what you deserve. You sow what you reap. Before I go any further, I'm just looking at some of the persons who have joined us. Good evening, Attison. Good evening, Albertine. Good evening, Dr. Christian. And good evening to Nama Fountain Filbert. Those are some of the persons who have said good evening to me. I am saying good evening to them, and I'm saying good evening to every other person who has joined us here this evening. Tonight we are looking at capital punishment, which is a live issue. It is a debate which has attracted invariably quite a number of passionate discussions throughout the world. It's a relevant issue here in Dominica. I want you to understand it, and I want you to participate. I want you to tell me what do you think of capital punishment. We are not necessarily analyzing the Rodman case, that is the Rodman Lewis case, which has just been completed in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Rodman, a young man who was accused of murdering his late girlfriend, he was found guilty. The prosecution asked for capital punishment. That is his death sentence. We call that justified killing. Hi, Otis Xavier, good evening. Now, are you for capital punishment? Are you against capital punishment? Capital punishment, we are talking about death penalty. Should Luis be subject to the death penalty? Of course, that is to be determined by the learned judge, the presiding judge over the matter. But our discussion goes beyond that case. We are discussing capital punishment in context of the global matrix on the issue. From since the 1970s, a number of countries have departed from capital punishment or the death sentence. Some countries have retained that type of punishment, though we have seen a decrease in the number of executions in places like Pakistan, Iran, Iraq. A number of Islamic countries continue to practice the death sentence. And this is not just for treason and murder. You know, in this modern world, we still have women being subjected to death when they are found to have committed adultery or they have broken the vow of chastity. Of course, those things happen in the Islamic world. That is based on their culture and their religion. You hear of the death sentence being placed on people who are found guilty for blasphemy. We have had quite a number of cases which have been subjects of discussions in Europe and other parts of the world. Good evening, Ivo James. How are you doing? And Renwick Robin from Toronto, Canada. I hope you're having a good evening. I hope everybody's doing well. We are here discussing capital punishments, a live issue in Dominica. The question is, should we ban capital punishment? Should we ban the death sentence? As I've stated, we have had only one person subject to the death sentence here in the Commonwealth of Dominica, and that was Mr. Newton in 1986. Artisan Lovely, what warrants someone to be sentenced to hard labor? Well, that is one of the punishments a court can impose on a guilty person. And actually, in many parts of the world which have banned capital punishment, this is one of the sentence which is imposed. You know, life sentence, hard labor. Now, some people may argue, why should the state take responsibility to feed somebody for the rest of his or her life? It comes at a cost. That is one of the economic arguments against the death sentence. But let's look at arguments for and arguments against the death sentence. We started by saying what is capital punishment. We look at the historical aspect of capital punishments as far as the methods concerned. I made mention of a few of them, burning, being left to wild animals, which would feed on the persons. Persons were subjected to all kind of cruel forms of justified murder. And in the postmodernism era, we see executions, we see shooting, we see hanging, we see gassing, we see different forms of execution which are less cruel and inhumane because, of course, the European Union, the human rights charters throughout the world have concluded that capital punishment is cruel, unjust, and inhumane. In the Caribbean, we have a number of cases that were decided by the Privy Council, concluding that capital punishment is in fact inconsistent with our Constitution, and as such, should Justice Wynant sentence Mr. Lewis to death, would likely see an appeal. The Privy Council is no longer the head of our judicial system. The Caribbean Court of Justice is the CCJ, and it'd be interesting if a matter like that were to go before the CCJ to ascertain whether the CCJ will uphold the decisions of the Privy Council as far as declaring that the death sentence is inhumane, it is cruel, and inconsistent with our Constitution, which says that we have a right to life. Yes, so I want to hear your questions. I want to know what you're thinking. I want to know what is your opinion. I see here someone is making a point. This is Norma. Hi, good evening, Norma. Once again, you said a vast preponderance of statistical evidence shows that the death penalty is no more effective than imprisonment in deterring murder, and that it may even be an incitement to criminal violence. Death penalty states as a group do not have lower rates of criminal homicide than non-death penalty states. Well, let's look at the general topics for and against capital punishments. So Norma has in fact stated that she appears, well, I wouldn't say that she has stated explicitly, but it would appear that she is against a death sentence by making a point that countries or states which practice the death sentence as retribution do not necessarily have a lower murder rate than countries which have banned the death sentence. And yes, statistically, we do not have any clear evidence which corroborates or substantiates the argument that the death sentence in fact deter homicides or murders. In fact, a lot of murders are spontaneous. That is, people do not premeditate. Now, if someone premeditates to kill another, it may be more justified for that person's life to be taken from him or her, because you would have had time to calculate the murder, you have had a willful intent, you put a plan in action, and you take somebody else's life. Therefore, in a situation like that, one could say the murder was premeditated, especially if it is executed in a very barbaric and aggravated manner. Then it may be more justified for death sentence in a situation like that. But persons like Norma is saying, well, those abolitionists who are making the point, the abolitionists who are making the point, and Norma seems to be one saying, look, statistically, the argument to justify capital punishment on deterrence is not true. There is no statistics to support that when we take people's life justifiably as a form of punishment, it's going to reduce or deter murder in the country. I do agree with that. But on the other hand, an economic argument is, why have somebody on hard labor, life sentence, and you have to feed that person? You know, that is money that could go into something else. That is money that could take care of a poor person. Don't you agree? So let's look at more arguments which are in support of the death penalty. Number one, we said retribution. Where there's retribution, it tends to bring some kind of closure to the victim's family. You know, in many parts of the world where someone loses his or her life, the family, the surviving family is left to mourn, they're left to suffer, they're left to imagine the return of their loved ones, and they look for justice. And therefore, when the assailants or the perpetrators are found guilty for committing such heinous offenses against their relatives, such as murder, families tend to feel more satisfied and fulfilled when the lives of these perpetrators are taken. So that is an argument which is used to support the death penalty. It brings some form of closure, some level of finality to the family of the deceased. Hi, Thomas Frederick. You are listening from French Guiana. I hope you're having a very good evening. And Artisan Lovey, you said the law will punish someone who commit murder to death, but how do you call the person who will be hanging that person? Isn't he killing too? Well, Addison, that is a very good point. And I guess that point is based on a moral anchor. A lot of our laws are embedded or stand on moral pillars, and that is one of the arguments which are often dealt with, especially from a biblical point of view. In the New Testament dispensation, it would appear that we are not justified in taking the life of another. In the Old Testament dispensation, the eye for eye and tooth for tooth philosophy works. But for those of us who are Christians, those of us who practice modern Christianity, we tend to think that it's never justified for a state or for a person to take the life of another. Well, of course, there are exceptions. Even if you're a Christian, we're not talking about self-defense, which is a valid defense in a murder trial. We're actually talking about where somebody's found guilty. Somebody's found guilty, just as this Rodman Lewis guy in the recent murder case. He was found guilty, and the prosecution asked for a death sentence. Hi, Ronnie Matthew. Blessings to you, Ronnie. We hope that you are doing well. We hope that you're doing very well in St. Martin. Dr. Christian says, the way it looks as is that all countries have militaries. All are authorized to kill for defense of their country. So apart from such Jehovah's Witness, churches support defense of their countries. Many innocent people have been killed by militaries and police, and people are okay with it. In cases of extremely heinous crimes, the death penalty may still be warranted, but generally, mankind has evolved more humane. I am glad most reasons for death penalty are no longer upheld in civilized countries. And that's a very potent point by Dr. Christian. I mean, the reality is in wars, we defend our countries, we kill people, and we kill many innocent people. I mean, currently there is a civil matter going on, some civil disturbance, some civil turmoil is taking place in Ethiopia, and a number of children have been killed. Historically, in many parts of the world, we have innocent people being killed in the name of defense of a group, defense of a people, advancement of a philosophy, advancement of countries. The question is, if we find those killings justified, then why do we have a problem in taking the life of somebody who has been found guilty for killing another? You know, so again, it's an ethical issue, it's a moral issue, it's about what you think. But in thinking, you must be rational and you must be consistent. You must not be hypocritical in that you justify killing of another, particularly an innocent person. And in another situation where somebody has been found guilty for killing, you do not want him to be sentenced to death. So you have to be careful in your argument. You do not want to be inconsistent. You do not want to be paradoxical. You want to be logical and well-reasoned in your points. Hey, Britley Anthony, you are listening from Anguilla. I hope you're doing well. I suspect that you're Dominican based in Anguilla. But Britley, are you for or against the death sentence? Do you think that we should practice the death sentence? Do you think that we should get rid of it like many other countries in the world? Of course, in Dominica, we have it on our books, on our law books, we have it, but we do not necessarily practice it. Since we're an independent nation, we have actually sentenced and executed one death penalty, and that is Mr. Newton in 1986. Frederick Newton, to be more specific. Frederick Newton was the head of the Defense Force in 1981. He and a group attempted to commit a coup d'etat to get rid of late Dame Eugenia Charles as the Prime Minister of Dominica. And in the process of the attempted coup d'etat, police, I think, was killed. The gentleman, Mr. Newton, was brought before the court. The trial took place. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. And in fact, he was hung in 1986. That's the only case we have in Dominica. But now we have another case where the prosecution has asked for the death penalty, the death sentence, and that has sparked a conversation in Dominica. And that's why I'm here. I want you to interact. I want you to say what you think about it. Do you think that we should, in fact, continue to have the death penalty on our books, even if it appears to be, I would say, not practical, because the Privy Council has held that the death sentence is unconstitutional, and therefore it doesn't make sense to even have it on our books. We probably should just get rid of it and fall in line with most other countries in the world, especially in the West, that have concluded that the death sentence is inhumane, is cruel, and it can never be justified. So what's your view? What do you think? Do you think in cases like the Rodman Lewis case that the accused, when he's found guilty, should be sentenced to death? Do you think that's going to help our society? Do you think that's going to reduce the number of murders? Do you think that's going to deter others? Do you think that the families of the victims are going to live a better life? Do you think we'll have a better country? You know, those are the kind of arguments that I would like to hear. Of course, in determination of whether a trial judge will sentence somebody to death in countries like in Dominica, where it's still on the books, the judge would have to take several things into consideration. The severity of the offense, whether the accused or the convict, committed an aggravated murder. Was the victim defenseless? What was the atrocity of the crime? Those are the type of things. The conduct of the accused. Did he cooperate with the police? Did he attempt to exacerbate the situation? I see Thomas Frederick is saying, no, no, no. Frederick, what are you saying? You should take the life of a murder accused when he's found guilty? Is that what you're saying? Or we should not take his life, put him in prison for life and take care of him? So if you have a 30-year-old accused found guilty for murder, we should not subject him to capital punishment. We should not send him to die. We should have him on at stock family prisons for the next 60 years. The state will take care of him, because if we take his life, we'll be committing an offense in the eyes of God. Is that your argument? What do you think, Thomas? What really is your justification for saying no to capital punishment? I would like to hear what you have to say. We have George Joseph. If Christianity has evolved and the church no longer stand by an eye for an eye, why the law have not evolved? Well, Joseph, yeah, the law has evolved in most countries. Dominica has it on its book, but practically we don't do it. I mean, as I said, I think it was 1998, Balso was found guilty for murdering his late girlfriend, and he was sentenced to death. He appealed the matter to the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. The Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court upheld the decision of the trial judge that he should be sentenced to death. That matter was appealed to the Privy Council, and the Privy Council held that the death sentence in Dominica is inconsistent with Section 2 and Section 5 of our Constitution. So while we have the death penalty in our books, but practically it's not something that we are practicing, and therefore it may make sense to just get it off our book completely. If we want to practice it, I'm sure there is a way we could justify it, because it's on our book anyway. As I said, we have a number of quasi-legal tribunals throughout the world, like the American Charter on Human Rights, Amnesty International, to name a few, continue to stand against the death penalty. Ronnie Matthew, what are you saying? Once you're found guilty of murder beyond a reasonable doubt, I think you should be hung for the crime. There must be no doubt whether the person committed the crime. Well, Ronnie, your point is well taken, because historically we have had cases where persons who were innocent, in fact, were sentenced to death. We do have facts. Back then, we did not have DNA evidence, especially when we had racial injustice to the highest. Black people in particular were accused of crimes they never committed, and they were sentenced to death. They were accused of rape, they were accused of killing white people, just to name a few, what was deemed to be heinous crimes. And they were sentenced to death, they were innocent, and therefore we do not want a repetition of that. Consequently, in places where death penalty is on the books, you want to ensure that whoever is found guilty, in fact, is guilty, because you wouldn't want to take the life of an innocent person, as has happened historically. So your point is well taken, Ronnie Matthew. Miss Alfred, is that John Alfred? Yes to the death penalty. There is absolutely no mercy for a murderer who hacks someone's loved one to death, and go and sit and make the victim's loved one take care of him or her in prison. So Jean Alfred supports the death penalty. Again, Jean, you have your views. You're not being unreasonable. That's the view of retribution. You take somebody's life, and therefore you forfeit your own life. And it's justified for the state to take your life. That is one of the strongest points in support of the death penalty. But a lot of times, even where a perpetrator is found guilty, he may in fact be suffering from a mental defect. He may have some illness. And why would you take somebody who is suffering from mental illness, and he himself is a victim in certain respects, and there's no way his action to take somebody else's life is justified. But by virtue of the fact that he suffers from a mental illness, which is a form of disease, he then has to go through death, justified death or hanging or execution or gassing, whatever it is. So you see, why is it that some people are reluctant to support capital punishment? Because some murder accused, in fact, are victims to the system already. A lot of murder accused, a lot of convicts would have had some kind of psychopathic, neurological, or psychotic problem. And in the first place, that's why people are sometimes inclined to commit offenses. They commit offenses of passion and some other offenses because of a mental defect. So somebody who has been subjected to some kind of mental defect commits a crime, and then the state fails to take responsibility and then hangs him. Because in as much as somebody has committed an offense, and based on the point of retribution, he has to pay for it. What is society paying for creating monsters? Because monsters are not just vomited from somebody's womb. They are not just, released or expunged from a womb. They are creatures of society. And I would like the discussion to take more of those things into consideration, because we're just looking at an accused from an individual point of view. But is society taking responsibility for the creation of monsters? Thomas Frederick says, I am not for the death penalty myself. Well, Thomas, your point is taken. I'm not sure exactly on what ground you are objecting to the death sentence or the death penalty. I'm sure you have your reasons. We would like to hear them. But I just raised a certain facet of the discussion, something that we rarely discuss. That is, what is the responsibility of society? To what extent is society taking responsibility for creating murderers? Sometimes we see inclinations and propensities in people at a very early age, and we do not have the facilities to help them, to help inhibit their propensities. So a lot of murderers statistically would have been petty offenders and, juvenile offenders. And because the system lacks certain facilities, they graduate into higher crimes. So we have Samuel Christian saying, if we are going to turn around violence against women in our culture, we have to start somewhere. Where surgeons come across a cancer, they cut it. And correct me if I'm wrong, did Jesus say something of that nature? I have great respect for people who accept responsibility for their actions and take their punishment as a man. I wouldn't want to leave, God forbid, if I did something so extremely heinous. Well, Dr. Sam, from a practical point of view and from a simplistic point of view, you may be right. But a murderer's mind is far more complex than we may give credit for. As I said, we have to make a proper analysis of a convict's head. Sometimes he may be suffering with some kind of problem. Of course, every case has to be measured against its own merit, but I believe that when somebody is found guilty, that person should undergo some kind of mental or psychiatric test to ascertain whether he has a mental illness. If he does have a mental illness, then I would say, probably life punishment. If he does not have a mental illness and the murder was calculated or premeditated, then that person, fine, execute him. Isabella Henry, good night. How are you doing? And KK, good evening. This is your favorite Facebook Live, and it is contending for Dominica. It is held at 8 p.m. every Sunday. I welcome you. The show will only improve as time elapses. We are looking at different topics in the Commonwealth of Dominica. This evening we are discussing the issue of the death penalty, and that discussion is born out of a decision which was taken in a recent murder trial in the Commonwealth of Dominica, the murder trial of Rodman Lewis. He was found guilty for murder, and the state prosecution asked for hanging, for death sentence, or capital punishment. And that has sparked or generated conversations in Dominica as to whether that gentleman that accused, in fact, should be subjected to death sentence. As I said earlier, we do have death sentence on our book, namely Section 2 of the Offences Against the Person Act, as well as in the Treason Act of Dominica. It is in our books, but we do not practice it. Historically, since we are independent, we have had only one person sentenced to death, and that was Mr. Newton in 1986. Since then, we have not had any. We have had other persons sentenced to death, but it did not go through. There was one gentleman at Kalinago I think it was sometime in the 90s. He was sentenced to death, and that never happened. As a matter of fact, I think there were 3 attempts to hang him, and that never took place. And based on the practice, he would have had to be forgiven. Eventually, he got a pardon from the president of the Commonwealth of Dominica, and he's a free man. So it's interesting. Same with Mr. Barso. I think Mr. Barso has been out of prison from moving to death sentence to being a free man after a number of years. So let me hear you. There are vociferous conversations out there, person giving their views on the issues. I want to hear your views. I see Dr. Christian have been giving his view. Clearly, he's not an abolitionist. It appears that he supports the death sentence, and he gives reasons. And I do see the merit in his points. I am not an abolitionist myself. I believe that the death sentence is warranted in some situations. I believe that if you take somebody's life and it is done in a premeditated and calculated and heinous and destructive way, then you have forfeited the right to live. I am only thinking that if you're sentenced to death, you should not be left on the death row forever, because that itself is cruel and inhumane. So if you're going to sentence somebody to death, it should be done expeditiously, meaning it must be done within a reasonable time, thus being consistent with the Constitution of Dominica, which is similar to most constitutions in the Commonwealth of Caribbean. But when we talk about a death sentence, a lot of time we just look at the individual criminal. But what about society? What responsibility is society taking for the indoctrinations, for the conditionings, for the poisons of our minds, and inclining us to do things? We look at mass media, you look at indoctrination of young people in certain areas, and at some point, not everybody is tamed, not everybody is indoctrinated to be calm. Some people develop inclinations because of social poisoning, and when they become monsters, we then allow them to take full responsibility, or we want them to take full responsibility. What is the responsibility of society, especially those which are anemic in the creation of rehabilitative measures or rehabilitation structures? In Dominica, as an example, we do not have any rehabilitation centers. We do not have the facilities and infrastructure to give people an opportunity to expunge the poisons from their systems. Once again, this is Contending for Dominica. This is your favorite Facebook Live, which is being held at 8 p.m. every Sunday. This evening, we are looking at capital punishment. Are you for or against it? We are looking at the arguments in favor of capital punishment and the arguments against capital punishment. Of course, the whole issue of capital punishment is debated on the issue of morals, on the issue of practicality, on the issue of economics. And I've heard a number of arguments for and arguments against. In small jurisdictions like ours, our crime rate is relatively low, although some people may argue that a murderer per 1,000 people or 10,000 people puts Dominica at a high bracket. But over the past couple of years, relatively, we have had few murders, and let us hope that continues. We have not been sentencing people to death, and even when we did, the persons were not hung or the persons were not executed, yet our murder rate is relatively low compared to some countries where the death sentence is practiced and people are executed every year, and yet their murder rate is high. Look at Jamaica. Jamaica has a very high murder rate, as well as Trinidad, Mexico, some of the countries where murder is very high in our region. But has death sentence helped? Statistically, there's no evidence to support the argument that the death penalty deters crimes. It discourages people from being murderers. As I said, a lot of murders are spontaneous, meaning that people do not sit and plant seeds of murder. They do not really calculate it and execute it. You do have professional murderers, persons who target the victims, who calculate their execution, and who carry it out with precision in a clinical and systematic way. People like that warrant to die when they're found guilty because they would have forfeited their right to live. But generally, the capital punishment is inconsistent with the constitutions in the Commonwealth countries, which says that we have a right to live, and we are also subject to fair and just punishment. And in some people's view, capital punishment can never be justified. All right, so let me hear from you. I think I have said quite a lot on this subject. Again, I want to repeat that we are looking at the death penalty. We are looking at capital punishment, as we would say it in certain corners of the world. We are discussing this because it's a live issue in Dominica, and it is sitting on the recent case of Mr. Rodman Lewis, who was found guilty for the murder of his late girlfriend. The prosecution asked for the death sentence. We are waiting the decision of the court as far as whether it will carry out the wishes of the prosecution. Personally, I doubt it. The judge is learned. She's very much aware of the decisions emanating from the Privy Council, which has declared that the death sentence is inconsistent with the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Dominica. But of course, we are now subject to the Caribbean Court of Justice, and it would be interesting to hear the justices on the Caribbean Court of Justice's view on the issue of the death penalty. I am subject to correction, but Justice Saunders sat on the Eastern Caribbean Court of Appeal, and he did hold, I think in the Spencer's case, that the death penalty is considered to be cruel, it is inhumane, and inconsistent with our Constitution. So if the matter were to go, a matter of that nature were to go to the Caribbean Court of Justice, I would suspect that that particular justice, in fact, would hold that same position based on consistency. It is now 8 minutes to the hour of 9 p.m. in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Wherever you are, I hope you are having a good evening. I hope you had a great day. Of course, it is Sunday. Many of us would have taken the day to relax in preparation for a hard-working week. Let me just wish you well for this week. Whatever you do, whatever you'll be doing, I hope you'll have success in it. I hope for those of you with your personal or private practice, I hope your practice will flourish this week. For those of you who are working for somebody else, I hope that your work will show your supervisor or your employer that you're a great asset to their work, and as such, that will go towards promotion. For those of you who are self-employed, I hope this week will create a lot of opportunities for you. You will make a lot of money, you'll meet a lot of people, and you will have a lot of cheers and happiness. Of course, I hope all of us will have a healthy week, and we will see throughout the week. None of us is guaranteed tomorrow, so let us be hopeful, let us be prayerful. Let us continue to stand for what is right, just, principled, pure, and good. Do not indulge ourselves in toxic things. If something is unproductive and destructive, just try to walk away from it. I just want to urge us to be good citizens. Wherever you are, be a good citizen, first and foremost to your creator, your maker, and then to your fellow brothers and sisters. So as I look, we have 23 persons viewing this live. Let me just thank you for being part of this. Thank you for taking time off to discuss the death penalty. Addison has been a consistent participant in the conversation here this evening. Addison is saying, George, can the guilty choose their own sentence: death or life imprisonment with hard labor. No artisan, a guilty person, a guilty individual, a guilty accused cannot choose his or her own punishment. When someone is found guilty, an opportunity will be given to him or her to do what is referred to as a plea in mitigation. And in the plea in mitigation, it is expected for that person to ask for leniency. And the person can suggest to the court what type of punishment he or she should be subjected to. But ultimately, it is for the court to decide how that person will be punished. So tonight, as an example, we have been referring to the Rodman Lewis case, this murder trial which has just been completed in the Commonwealth of Dominica, where the prosecution asked for the death sentence against Rodman. As I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be carried out. The judge will decide what type of sentencing will be imposed against the gentleman. Like any other criminal trial, in any other criminal trial, when somebody is found guilty, the judge decides the type of punishment, and the type of punishment is based on several things: whether the person is remorseful, and of course, remorse is measured against the person's conduct before the trial, at the time of committing the offense, during the trial, and post the guilty verdict. If the judge is of the view that the person was cooperative, the person was remorseful, that goes in favor of the accused or the guilty person, and as such, that will help the judge to give a less harsh punishment. If the person showed no remorse during the offense, during the trial, and after the verdict, then that gives a judge more reasons to impose a harsher penalty. But the person himself or herself cannot dictate to the court the type of punishment that he or she should be subjected to. The conduct of the person has to be taken into consideration. So, for example, in criminal cases, when someone is found guilty, the court has to look at good character evidence. Not every defense attorney invokes good character in a trial. A matter of fact, in the Balso case, one of the grounds that was discussed was whether the lawyer for Mr. Balso had used good character evidence. Samuel Christian, he says, I met the young man in question a few weeks before the incident. I was very impressed with him. I wish the best for him and his family. However, I do hope the victim, their rights must be respected. Psychological evaluation, of course, is a must. Yes, Samuel, Dr. Christian, as I said, a lot of murders are spontaneous. What you said there is your truth. You did meet the guy, according to you. He appeared to be a very nice person, and he may very well be a nice person. But at the time when he committed the offense, he had lost his head, and he would have lost his head due to several reasons. It could have been for a disease. It could have been out of passion. As you know, there are crimes of passion where people go berserk, people lose their minds in situations of a man and a woman. Sometimes people, just get neurological, just go crazy. You call them offense of passion, but offenses of passion. As to whether that defense was used in that case, which we're talking about, I do not know, Dr. Sam. Every defense attorney is different. Attorneys identify certain defenses which vary across the board. In that particular case, I started following it and then I departed from examining it. From what I understand, there was difficulty in actually identifying the defense of Mr. Rodman. So do not be surprised if that matter is appealed. It may be appealed, and I suspect if it were to be appealed, that Mr. Rodman could put the blame on the attorney for not identifying a proper defense. Had I been the attorney, I would have taken a different approach, but each attorney to his own. The attorney in question did what he felt was best, and I can only wish him well. Chris Bogono, good evening, how are you? Thank you, my brother. That's what we need. We just need love and kindness. Of course, we are different in many ways, ideologically, philosophically, historically, geographically, physically, we are different. But our differences should not prevent us from having love and kindness towards each other. It's better to love than to hate. It's better to be kind than to be unkind. It's better to be at peace than to be at war. It is better to speak kind words to each other than to speak harsh, unkind words. Matter of fact, those of us who are kind, we tend to be more peaceful. So thank you, Chris, and I send you back the love and kindness. So we have been here for 1 hour, 3 minutes, and 41 seconds. I'm here with you on Contending for Dominica. Today is the 29th of November, 2020. Every Sunday, we are going to meet at 8 p.m. As long as the good Lord gives us life, we will be here to discuss an issue of national significance in the Commonwealth of Dominica. We are contending for Dominica. Our objective is to create a better society, a better place, a more advanced and progressive country for equality of wealth, generation of ideas which will dispose us to better living. As you know, we are advocating not just for financial advancement, but intellectual and spiritual fulfillment, because in many countries, the material wealth is present, but people are intellectually impoverished, although generally there is a nexus between economic advancement and intellectual advancement. But we have an inverse relationship sometimes with economic advancement and spiritual advancement. People are becoming more and more secular. We have to try to preserve our values in Dominica. We have to try to ground the people into some kind of ideology, because we are living now in an ideological less society. A lot of people just do not have an ideology. They don't have a philosophy. They don't know what they're standing for. They don't have a purpose. So let us encourage people to understand their purpose and understand that we are in fact in need of a better Dominica. Juanita Prince, good evening to you. You are from Brooklyn, or you are living in Brooklyn. I suspect you're a Dominican based in Brooklyn. And like many other Dominicans, you are in the United States of America with the hope to make life better for you and your family, some of whom may be in Dominica. It must be cold in Brooklyn right now. I hope you are making yourself warm. And although we have the COVID and we do not know when this is going to go away, that you will make plans to come to Dominica to enjoy your country. It is a beautiful country. There are certain things about it that are gifts, the water, the mountains. You know, we are still beautiful people at the end of the day, and we still have a lot of love to go around. So once again, let me just thank you, Juanita, for joining us, and every other person who have joined us here this evening. We are going to wrap it up so that we can go ahead to prepare for tomorrow. Juanita Prince is from Marigot. Juanita, I hope you're doing well. I hope your family in Marigot is doing well. I want to thank you for joining our program here this evening. Of course, I urge you to share this video and be reminded that we'll be back here on Sunday next week. Every Sunday we're going to meet. The starting time is 8 p.m. We're going to be discussing issues of relevance so that we can feel satisfied. I want to thank every one of you. Jonathan Bristol, good evening. How are you doing? I want to thank Dr. Sam. I want to thank Nama. I want to thank Chris. I want to thank Artisan and every other participant here this evening. It was a pleasure to have you. It was a pleasure for us to share our views. This evening we looked at capital punishment. Some of you are for it and some of you are against it. I suspect from what I gathered here this evening that most of you are for capital punishment. You see, Rui, you say there's nothing to enjoy under the DLP. Well, you see, you know, I understand where you're coming from. We could be more progressive in Dominica. After all, when you look at the country relative to our neighbors, we are backward in many ways. We have made some incremental progress in the Commonwealth of Dominica. some of the things that we are doing now are things which ought to have been done like 20, 25, 30 years ago. But we can't change the past. We have to give God thanks. We have to take it one day at a time. And let us hope when the opportunity for changing the system comes again, that Dominicans will make a decision to try another party in government so that we can then get a better country. You see, Rui, I suspect that you like your political topics. We'll have quite a number of them as we go forward. We'll be having topics on the economy of Dominica, whether the CBI program is in fact the economic salvation for Dominica, whether the economic program has really helped us to progress, whether people benefiting, whether there has been a fair and just distribution of wealth generated from the sales of our citizenships, whether the ordinary Dominican in fact is getting his fair share of the sale of our lifeline, our lifeblood. That is a topic that I really want to discuss. The economic citizenship scheme is not as transparent as some of us think, and I want ordinary people to really understand what's happening. Of course, we're going to have topics on the environment. We see what's happening now when it rains, flooding. What is the cause of that? What can we do to curtail flooding in Dominica? Today, some rain in the northern part in particular has caused flooding of certain parts of Kempinski, according to some reports. Clearly, this is an issue of concern. So we will have such a discussion. We will look at the geography of Dominica, urbanization, what has happened, what we need to do to take care of our environment so that we will be less prone to flooding. We'll be discussing social issues, sports, just to name a few. And of course, I invite you to make your suggestions. Tell me what you'd like to discuss as we go forward. You can inbox me right here on Facebook, or you can contact me via WhatsApp at 245-0704. That is 245-0704. You can make your suggestions days before the Sunday's program so that I will highlight what you want to discuss. So once again, I want to thank you. I think that we had a very good and fruitful program. We looked at capital punishment. We looked at the reasons for capital punishment. We looked at the evolution of capital punishment. We looked at the arguments for and the arguments against capital punishment. And we are about to wrap up. Once again, I thank you. Yusuf, good evening. Jonathan, good evening. Juanita, good evening. Chris, good evening. Burley, good evening. Dr. Christian, good evening. Artisan, KK, I see you there. I hope you enjoyed KK. I hope you enjoyed Isabella. And I hope Thomas Frederick, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found the program to be a good one. I hope you learned something new this evening. Some of you didn't realize that we have executed only one person due to capital punishment since independence. Greatly thank you. The numbers have risen, but nonetheless, we have to put this to an end. Artisan Josh, I will not say whether he should get the death penalty or not. He made the decision alone, so let the court decide, because they got the real story as to what occurred at the time. I feel for the family of the young woman, is that it? Yeah, you say, Josh, I will not say whether he should get the death penalty or not. He made the decision alone, so let the court decide, because they got the real story as to what occurred at the time. I feel guilt. I feel for the family of the young lady. The family of the accused is hurting as well. Well, Artisan, this in fact is balanced in that you're looking at the young man and his family, and you're also looking at the family of the victim. This is what you call a balanced view. Of course, you will not bear the story played out in the court. The jury has taken a decision. Now it's left up to the trial judge, Justice Wynant, to determine the type of sentence which he's going to impose on the gentleman. Honestly, I feel for him. Some people may have a different view. I feel for him. And personally, I hope he's not sentenced to death. And even if he is, I would suspect that his attorney would appeal, or some other attorney would appeal on his behalf. Because as I stated, the Privy Council has held that a death sentence in Dominica is inconsistent with the Constitution of Dominica. I don't think that decision is absolute because it did talk about aggravated murder, meaning that if it is justified for somebody to be sentenced to death based on the nature of the crime, then it may be justified. But we will see. I didn't want to make Mr. Rodman the issue here tonight. We're just looking at the death sentence from a general point of view. But we refer to the matter because it's a hot issue in Dominica right now. So I am going to say good evening. Good evening, folks. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed interacting with you, and I'm looking forward to next Sunday. Next Sunday, we will have another discussion. I will make it known unto you what we are going to discuss, so you'll be ready. You'll be part and parcel of the discussion. I want you to be part of it. I want to hear your views. I want to know that you are listening. I want to know that you enjoy. I urge you to share the video. Although we are wrapping up, share the video on your timeline. Some of you would save it and give another person the opportunity to listen. So let us hope all the best for all of us. Once again, let us have a great week. Let us have a successful week. A week with a lot of love, a lot of kindness. We are in the Christmas season. Some of you may not celebrate Christmas, whether it is spiritual, whether it's religious, whether it's financial, whether it is commercial. During the Christmas season, one of the things I like is the spirit of giving and sharing, especially to those who are less fortunate. So take this Christmas season and share, starting at home. You may not have money, but share your time. Visit your elderly folks wherever you are and put a smile on somebody's face. Remember, it's good to be kind. Ronnie, thank you. Yes, is that more? Yes, true. Thank you. So, great week for us. May God keep us, protect us, and bless us. May we have good health. We must never take that for granted. Nowadays, you're just hearing people collapsing and dying. We're in the land of the living. Please do not take your life for granted. Do your utmost. Eat well, rest well, laugh, smile. Don't carry the world on your shoulders. You met the world with your troubles. As Solomon said, our life is very short. From birth to death, short, yet filled with trouble. Short life filled with trouble. But we have faith in a God who fights our battle. So put everything in his hands, put all the stress in the hands of Jesus, and smile. Okay? Do not get diabetes and high blood pressure. And if you have any of the above, take care of yourself. Don't make it worse. All right? So once again, I'm saying good evening. God bless you. Until next Sunday, this is Joshua Francis, your host. I love you. Take care. Bye.